What is going on, everybody? I am Hoops and Hip Hop, and welcome to the first episode of the Pokeblock Podcast here on UCast Studios. My name is Hoops and Hip Hop, and if you haven't heard of me before, I am a Pokemon-focused content creator on YouTube, and I've been brought over here to the UCast Studios channel to kind of just give my thoughts on Pokemon and do a show where I talk about anything and everything Pokemon-related once a week. So if you are new to me and my voice, welcome. If you are here from my channel, thank you for coming over. And for this first episode, I decided I wanted to go ahead and talk about Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. These are the most recent games prior to the reveal, or I should say the release of Sword and Shield that we're expecting later this year, and you can definitely expect some episodes on that as we get more information. But in terms of Let's Go, I wanted to talk about why I think, in terms of a fun factor, that the Let's Go games are easily one of the best Pokemon games ever. In my opinion, I would only put Heart Gold and Soul Silver above it. I just had an absolute blast with these games, and because these games, in terms of just their presence, their existence, how they were received in terms of gameplay, they were very controversial and seemed to split the fan base apart in a way that no other main series Pokemon game has before. And because I loved it so much, even though it seemed like so many other people hated it, I wanted to go ahead and kind of give my opinion and my thoughts as to why I personally enjoyed it so much. So yeah, basically, like I was saying, in terms of a fun factor, these games are my second favorite Pokemon games ever. And what I mean by a fun factor is purely how much fun did I have with the game. And that is actually a huge deal. I think people get, they just get like really lost in gameplay and graphics and storyline and all of these other like technical type things when it comes to video games, because when it comes to the gaming industry in this day and age, it's just so much more Hollywood, for lack of a better term, than it used to be. It's so much more big time. There's obviously so much more money into it than there was back in the 90s when Pokemon started, or even the 80s when gaming really started to get a big following. So I think that really changes the perception on games as a whole. People look at like frame rates and resolution and all of these other things, when in reality, the number one reason why games are made and why games exist to this day is because they're fun. If people didn't have fun with them, they wouldn't succeed and they wouldn't play them, and therefore we wouldn't have a gaming industry. So TLDR, I think the fun factor is a hugely important thing when analyzing any game. And when it comes to Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, I had so much fun with these games, and there's several reasons why. The first reason why I think, and probably one of the biggest reasons as to why this game just wowed me so much, I guess you could say, is because these were the first games, even though they're not technically like a main series entry, because they obviously deviate in a lot of ways, they are, for better or for worse, for all intents and purposes, they are a main series game, because you go around, you have a team of Pokemon, you battle Pokemon like we all know and love, and you battle gym leaders, and you do that whole thing. So for all intents and purposes, this is a main series game, and it is the very first main series game that we have ever seen on a home console, let alone in HD. So being able to play these games and have that main series Pokemon experience on not only a console in HD, but being able to play on the big screen on like a 55-inch TV, where previously we were relegated to basically like an 8-inch or whatever it is screen on the 3DS, or even the 3DS XL for that matter. It's just such a huge jump in clarity and quality that you couldn't help, as either a casual fan or a hardcore fan like me, but be absolutely wowed and in awe of what you're seeing, because, especially for me, like as a longtime Pokemon fan, been playing these games since the originals, when they were literally 8-bit and black and white, just to be able to see this kind of progression and see something that we've all dreamed about as Pokemon fans for a long time is just absolutely, like I said, awe-inspiring. And so I found myself just completely invested and immersed into this game solely based on that. But like I said, graphics and fidelity and resolution aren't everything when it comes to a game. It does have a lot to do with the fun factor, the actual gameplay. But I think your overall experience, there's something to be said about that as well, and that definitely contributed to my experience. However, when it comes to like me actually playing the game and the fun that I truly did have with it, I had a blast with this game, just because, like I was saying, it's the main series Pokemon experience, and the key difference here, the thing that makes this game stand out, are those differences that I mentioned earlier. And these differences were ones that were very contentious amongst the fan base. Things like no wild Pokemon battles, having to use motion controls to capture Pokemon. You just had a bunch of different things like that. There was no held items. A lot of different things that are staples in the main series that just didn't get translated to these games, and that left a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths, I think, just because of the fact that these are the very first Pokemon games on a home console, and people have been wanting them for so long, and so I think people just, it kind of wasn't what they wanted for that first home console Pokemon game experience. But when you take it at face value, all of these things, all of these changes, I think really added to the charm of this game, starting with the catching mechanic. Having to, first of all, not battling the Pokemon and just straight up catching them Pokemon Go style, because this game is heavily inspired by Pokemon Go and it's designed to integrate with it. I think, honestly, that was fantastic. I know that's not going to be a universal opinion by any stretch of the imagination, but when I experienced it during my first initial playthrough, I found that it was a really nice change of pace to the battles. And that's the thing. That's why I really don't understand the argument of no wild Pokemon battles is bad, is because this game still has trainer battles, you still have gym leader battles, you still have Elite Four battles, and you still have the champion battles. So, like, it's not deviating so much from that Pokemon experience that you don't get to experience a Pokemon battle, for instance. You still have all of those key components there for the most part when it comes to Pokemon battling. And there's no shortage of Pokemon battles either. It's not like they reduced the number of trainers in the game. There's plenty of battles to be had in this game, so there's really no complaining there. And as far as like catching the Pokemon themselves and making it a challenge to catch them, because having Pokemon games be a challenge is another big thing that a lot of fans really want in today's Pokemon games. The Pokemon were still like just as difficult as ever to catch, because yeah, you might not have had to weaken them in most cases, but they still had their catch rates that Pokemon always have that make them easy or harder to catch. And then they use the Pokemon Go mechanic of kind of moving around the screen, and combined with the motion controls that you use to catch them with the Joy-Con, you very easily can miss your target when it comes to throwing your Pokeball at the Pokemon, which, if you've ever watched the anime, that's how it is in the TV show and in the real Pokemon world. You kind of have to hit your target with that Pokeball in order to even have a chance to catch the Pokemon in the first place. And Let's Go brought that kind of mechanic into the Pokemon video games for the very, very first time. And I think that's a very underrated thing that just hasn't been talked about a whole lot, that these games brought to the table, and I personally thought it was fantastic, especially when it came to those few battles that you actually battled the wild Pokemon. And this was relegated, or I should say held back, to the legendary Pokemon of the game, so like Articuno, Moltres, Zapdos, and Mewtwo. And this is where, in order to be able to have the opportunity to even catch them in the first place, you had to beat them in a battle. And I honestly think, just bar none, this is the best way to do legendary battles ever. And it makes me want to have the Pokemon Go catching mechanic in actual main series games going forward, just for the simple fact that, like I said, it made it a real challenge to catch these legendaries. And the challenge in Pokemon games has been such a big issue. People have been saying with games like X and Y and Sun and Moon that they're not hard enough. They're catering too much to the younger demographic. They're making it too easy. So to not only have the challenge of a low catch rate for a Pokemon with a legendary, having to actually hit your target and throw the Pokeball in the right way, but also just having to beat them in a battle, and obviously it's a legendary, so they're no pushover. I think that's just like literally the triple whammy of factors that make for a good legendary fight. And honestly, I hope they keep it around long term into Sword and Shield. Sword and Shield looks like it's a much more traditional type Pokemon experience, so we'll have to wait and see on that. But I just had a lot of fun with the catching mechanic because it changed up the gameplay. It offered a different pace that was nice to kind of go back and forth with the trainer battles. And for the legendaries, it really gave me a sense of challenge, immersion, and just overall enjoyment. Like I've been saying, that's the message of this whole podcast, is that I just had a blast catching Pokemon in this game thanks to the catching mechanic, rather than it being a hindrance like so many people on the other side of this argument have been saying and have kind of been very vocal and loud about that opinion. But moving on from the catching mechanic though, there were several other things that this game did that really made it enjoyable. And one of the things I want to talk about now is the story aspect. Now, the story aspect, given that this game is a remake of Pokemon Red and Blue and even Fire Red and Leaf Green, it's obviously the same story. It's nothing new to experience, and I've played both of those games multiple times, so I knew what to expect in this game. But the thing I really enjoyed about this game in particular is that it took the classic story of Pokemon Red and Blue, the classic story of the Kanto games, and it kind of remixed it, just like the gameplay itself was remixed with all of the different mechanics that we mentioned earlier. And so for the most part, the game was truly Pokemon Blue or Pokemon Yellow even, just remade. But there were key differences in the story that also gave you a new experience at the same time of having a familiar experience. And I think that is honestly pretty incredible in and of itself, because there is a lot of value in kind of re-experiencing a classic game. That's why remakes are so popular nowadays in the gaming industry, because people love that sense of nostalgia, being able to go back and explore a game that they played a long time ago, especially if it's remade in HD. So there's certainly value and enjoyment that can be had in that aspect of it. But then obviously, as per tradition, as per any new game that you play or any new thing that you experience in general, the fact that it's new is also very appealing, because you want to experience a new story, you want to experience a new game and gameplay and all these different things. And because this game has not only the new gameplay elements that I previously mentioned, but it has the new kind of elements to the story, I think you get the best of both worlds. You get the familiar, nostalgic enjoyment out of it, and you get the new game enjoyment out of it as well. And I honestly cannot think of a game that has ever provided that at all. Like, I will not confess to, or profess, or however you want to say it, I will not admit to playing every video game that's out there. Far from it, in fact. But I definitely have played a lot of games in my time, and I cannot name you a single other game that has provided that unique sense of really the best of both worlds when it comes to a new experience versus an old experience. But getting into the specifics of what this new experience is, essentially it's the same story, but it's told kind of from a different perspective. So instead of playing the classic Red character that we all know and love from the original, and instead of having Blue / Gary Oak as your rival, You play as I don't know if they have a name. I'm pretty sure the player character has a name. I can't think of it right off the top of my head. But you play as a different player character, and then your rival is no longer Blue, it's Trace. And even though like you're playing as different characters, it's not just a simple face swap, because those two characters, Red and Blue, actually factor into this new different story. And spoilers if you haven't played the game yet, but basically you run into Blue later on in the game and he tells you that, oh, he's been helping his grandpa with the Pokedex, and he even talks about his journey and his Pokemon adventure, referencing the events of Red and Blue. So it kind of comes out that these games are basically, they're kind of set in a different universe with the same events, but due to them being set in a different universe, they kind of Red and Blue's adventure that you experienced in Red and Blue takes place slightly before the events of this game that take place at the same time as Red and Blue, just in a different timeline, so the events are tweaked a little bit. It's kind of complicated, but basically it just allows for these characters to be in the game that we all know and love, but in a new setting. Like, Blue is no longer your rival. He's kind of like this older mentor type figure that steps in to back you up as you're trying to not only get gym badges, but also beat Team Rocket later on in the story. And it's just really cool to have those new elements in the game, because it gets you excited going through the game. Like, I remember playing the game myself, and obviously, once again, going back to that new versus old, best of both worlds philosophy, I remember just going through the game and obviously being familiar with it. I was kind of just going through the motions, having fun with it for sure, but just going through the motions because I kind of knew what to expect. But then all of a sudden, I would get this new cutscene that happened that did not happen before. And it would just fascinate me beyond belief, because they were telling a new story while telling the same story at the same time. And to see that kind of happen right before your eyes, especially when you're not expecting it, because you're expecting this game to be kind of just a straight up remake, it was really a pleasant surprise and just immersed me in the game that much more. And I really enjoyed that story perspective. And to top it all off, they added in a couple other characters as well to kind of show you that, once again, it wasn't just a remake. It was basically kind of a retelling of those classic games, because, once again, spoiler warning if you haven't played this game yet, but they added characters like Mina from Pokemon Sun and Moon that obviously did not appear in the originals because she wasn't even created yet, and they kind of just threw her in as a nice little cameo. And they even threw in Green, who, if you don't know, if you're not super familiar with Pokemon, she was speculated back in the day to be the original female player character for Pokemon Red and Blue, because she appeared on a magazine that was promoting the game along with Red and Blue, but she never made it into the game, and she basically was only ever in the manga of the Pokemon franchise. That's the only time she ever made an appearance. And she actually made her like video game debut in these games as kind of like a boss, like final boss type of character after you finish the main story. And that was like unbelievable. That was really incredible, because they did not have to do that. And being a longtime Pokemon fan and knowing the history of that character, it was just really cool to be able to see that cameo made and see her finally get the kind of stardom she deserved in the video games. And just kind of, I don't know, it just really was an enjoyable experience all the way around. And like I think that new versus old mentality is the best way I can describe it in terms of just how enjoyable it was, because it gave you new things while still being able to experience the old things. And on the point of kind of connecting to other media and other Pokemon games, I should say, another really cool thing that happened in these games was not only was Mina in the game, and Obviously, she was in Pokemon Sun and Moon. But in addition to that, when you, once again, spoiler warning, just going to throw that out there just so I don't get anyone too mad at me. But when you battled Lieutenant Surge, the third gym leader, and you beat him, he actually gave you an autograph. And that autograph is the very same autograph that you find in your room in Pokemon Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Moon. So it had little Easter eggs like that just connected it to the rest of the Pokemon world that made it a lot of fun. And it was just those wow kind of moments that just really did a lot for the game, to where you could even enjoy it. If you'd played through the Kanto-based games a million times, you could still enjoy it and have a lot of fun with it. And that's why I really, really enjoyed the games. But moving on even from that, there was one more thing I kind of wanted to touch on, and that was kind of the basic nature, you could say, of these games. One thing that people really did not like about these games were the fact that they were so stripped of everything that we had come to know in the Pokemon games. Like, if you had talked to a competitive player, for instance, there were competitive players that absolutely hated the ideas of these games because there was no held items, as I mentioned before. There are no abilities in this games. I believe there are natures, but they just aren't used the same way. Like, competitive gameplay is just completely stripped out of this game, to the point where the Pokemon Company themselves, in their VGC competitive video game battling format, they're still using Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. They're not even using these games, even though obviously they're far newer. So that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, and they basically just it caused them to label this game as kind of like a baby's first Pokemon game, which more or less that's kind of what it was supposed to be to a certain degree, but not in the way that people were painting it. And in my experience, even though the game was a lot simpler compared to previous Pokemon titles, it really just did not feel that way when you played it, and was actually the exact opposite. I found it extremely refreshing. To be able to play through a Pokemon game and not have to worry about the things that make the game more complicated, like abilities and just all of these other things that kind of not necessarily make the Pokemon games worse by any means, but just give you more to consider. They give you more to think about. And I don't know, I just found myself able to kind of turn off my brain and play the game and kind of just roll through it and not have to worry about little technical type things. Like, I remember a specific instance where I was battling Koga, the gym leader Koga, and he had a Weezing out, and I had a Sand Slash because I had that ground type advantage, and I had the initial thought of, Weezing has Levitate. I'm not going to be able to do an Earthquake damage, or I'm not going to be able to use Earthquake because it's going to be ineffective. But then it occurred to me that because there were not abilities in this game, I didn't have to worry about that, and I could just play the game and kind of just use the moves I wanted to move, essentially, or use the moves I wanted to use, and not have to just consider all of these technical type things that I really didn't want to consider. And even though from an outside perspective, it definitely can seem like it detracts because you're taking away things out of the game, and that initially, just from a outside perspective, just doesn't seem like it would ever be good. But in my experience, it was really good. Once again, it made the game really fun because I didn't have to think as much. There was not as much to consider. I could just sit back and enjoy the game. And that's the thing I kind of want to finalize this episode of our podcast with, is that the reason why I rate this game so highly is because this game, almost more than any other Pokemon game, like I have been saying, is a game, a Pokemon game at least, that I have been able to just sit down and turn off my brain and enjoy. And I cannot tell you personally, as an adult now, I mean, I played a lot of Pokemon games as a child. I grew up with the franchise, but now that I'm playing Pokemon games as an adult and I have adult things to do and adult kind of responsibilities and worries and all that stuff, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate being able to turn on a game like this, turn off my brain, and kind of just go. Like, it was so refreshing to be able to do that. And then with I haven't even gotten to all the other, like, positive changes that this game brought, like Pokemon in the overworld, that you could just run into. Like, you can see the Pokemon in the wild. You can ride on flying Pokemon, or you can ride on, like, Pokemon like Arcanine and just ride them around in the world like we've all imagined and dreamed of. So there were also changes that we've never seen, even though there's so much talk about, like, the quote-unquote negative changes about the game. There are some very, very positive changes that are just objectively amazing, like being able to ride Pokemon, seeing them in the overworld, things like that. So just, I don't know, like, this game brought so many positive things to the table, to where it had the positive stuff that was just positive, and then it had the stuff that even that was perceived negative, that when I experienced it for myself and actually played it, I beyond enjoyed it, and I loved it so much. And I think just the sense of relaxation that it brought to me when I played it, like I said, being able to just turn off my brain and go, the sense of fun that I had, having those new story elements that fascinated me while still being in that familiar world, and adding those new elements into the game, like, that we've never seen before, like being able to ride Pokemon and see Pokemon in the overworld, and the catching mechanic, being able to actually throw a Pokeball like in the TV show and having that be a factor, and having it add to the challenge and the different pacing of the game. Just all of these things created such a fresh experience while I was having a familiar experience at the same time. And I know I kind of keep going back to that new versus old statement. I keep kind of like going back in circles and repeating myself, but I truly think that's the point of the game. That's what makes it so good, is its ability to do that. I know I'm kind of rambling, but I don't think I'm rambling at the same time, because I think that's where this game excels so much, is that in every facet of it, whether it's the gameplay mechanics, whether it's the story, whether it's the new features, whether it's the old features, whether it's just anything about this game, it balances new and old perfectly and allows you to get enjoyment out of the new while having that sense of nostalgia about the old. And that is what made it so fun for me, in addition to just being able to turn off my brain and go. And personally, that's why I think it is, in terms of a fun factor, the second greatest pair of Pokemon games of all time. But with all that being said, that is just my personal opinion, and obviously opinions are a thing on the internet. So if you guys are listening to this and you're watching it on YouTube, definitely let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're listening on iTunes or Spotify or wherever else this ends up, because I know it's going to be up some other places as well, feel free to follow me on Twitter at HoopsVGM, or you can follow me on Instagram at HoopsVGM, Hoops and Hip Hop. I'm also on Facebook. I'm on YouTube, like I said. There's a bunch of different basically all social media you can find me, and let me know your thoughts. It's definitely fun to be able to share my opinion on these things in an extended type of format, because I've never really got the chance to do this before. So I had a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it. So I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. And I am looking forward to many more episodes of the Pokeblock Podcast. Like I said, I'll be back here once a week, every week. Should be the same day every day. Depending on when this goes up, it'll be the same time next week. And we'll kind of just make it a weekly thing. So once again, I hope you guys enjoyed listening. I loved having you here, and I will catch you guys in the next one.